Welcome to Divine Love Talk with Dr. Parthenia Grant, where we talk about health, well-being, and the love of the divine that exists in all of us. Now, here's your host, Dr. Parthenia Grant.
Thank you for joining us once again on Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant and my co-host, Dr. Sarah Larsen from drsarahlarsen.com, and our other co-host joining us via Skype from Estonia, Kim Michaels. Kim is our expert on spirituality and the ego, and we've got a lot of amazing information for you today regarding the very least you should know about the ego, all of his tricks and illusions. And of course, we're not going to be able to cover all of it today, so we're going to be doing a 4-part series on this because Dr. Sarah and I have coming up our first Healing What Hurts all-day workshop at the beautiful Americana on Brand in Glendale, and it's March 16th, a Saturday, from 10 until 5, where we will be taking you through major breakthroughs that will help you overcome those areas in your life where you're blocked, and the ego is a particularly strong stumbling block.
It really is, and it's so beautiful that, you know, on these radio shows, we've got about an hour at most to give you information.
Well, with commercials, maybe 35 minutes.
Right, to inspire you, but one-on-one, we're so connected to our source, to our oneness, and we've worked on this. I know you've worked on this for about 10 years.
Yes, I've been teaching about the ego for about 10 years. Kim has been writing about it for over 30 years, and he's just a wealth of information at Transcendence Toolbox. So, Kim, we're going to be sharing some of the information from Transcendence Toolbox with the audience today. So, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
And it's so exciting for me to share about the ego growing up in the East and then also coming to the West, where there's a huge difference in the way that we think in our upbringing. And so I feel like the egos, it's been embedded in me to think without the ego is one of the awarenesses that is such a gift, and to really be able to bring that growth and watching that perspective, coming to this country and meeting all the kids and meeting everyone in ego or separatedness from source, versus always having one foot connected to source and always having one foot connected to what's going on internally.
And that is a beauty to behold when I travel in the East, especially in Bali, where the people are actually living it in every aspect of their lives. And I think that as Americans, we could use a bit more grace, and that's what we're going to be sharing with people at the workshop. And later, you're going to be giving us the difference between the egoic mind and the higher self. We got a whole list of little triggers. But Kim, what I wanted to start out with is getting the audience to understand some of the illusions of the ego. And one of the central illusions of the ego that you cover on your website is when the ego convinces you that following an outward teaching will get you to heaven without giving up the ego. So I wanted to start with that, Kim, if you could share something on that topic.
Yeah, well, the ego is always at a deficit because it's the way I look at the ego, and I know there are different ways to define the ego, and I don't want to say that mine is the only one or better than anybody else's, but the way I look at the ego is that it actually is what separates us from our source, separates from us from our higher self.
From oneness.
And so because the ego is created out of separation, it can never bring us back to oneness. And oneness I see as the goal of all spiritual and religious teachings.
Yes.
Is to get back to oneness with our source. And so the ego can never do that. And so it always has to create the appearance that we can get where we want to go without giving up the ego. And that's precisely, as you said, many of the outer religions in the world, they give you that impression. I mean, the simplest possible way is religions who basically say that if you are a member of that religion And if you follow a few simple outer rules, you are guaranteed to go to heaven.
You're going to be saved.
And that, of course, is the ego's dream. Yeah. That's
Yes.
the ego's dream, you know.
Yes. Well, and, I found a piece on your website. There's a 9-part series called The Least You Should Know About Your Ego. And those of you who really are suffering in many or even one area of your life, you've got to understand that that's the ego game, is it's going to keep you in suffering. And Kim, I posted the link to that 9-part series that you have, very short little essays,
right.
Teaching people the very least that they should know about their ego. So you can go to Facebook, Divine Love Talk, and check out that link, and to my Facebook at Parthenia Grant. And Kim has some amazing stuff. And I took a lot of notes, Kim. But one of the quotes that you had, and you mentioned that when the soul lost its connection to God, it felt alone, even abandoned. And because this aloneness was unbearable, the soul needed something to take the place of its spiritual teacher, which in the Garden of Eden, the people were referring to the spiritual teacher as God. And that something became the human ego, which is designed as a way to compensate for the soul's loss of connection. The ego is designed to prevent the soul from feeling alone. Now, I thought that was very cogent, Kim, because we've been taught that our ego is our amigo and that we have no identity without our ego. But I wanted to point out that the ego is our false sense of self, which we believe is our identity, and we believe that that is all that we are is our ego. So I wanted, Sarah, if you could give the ego versus the false self some of the traits so that the audience will know when they're operating from their ego and when they're operating from their higher self. And I do have this posted on Facebook.
It's such a beautiful image and such a beautiful thought to really understand the false self versus the true self. The false self is going to think me. How does this affect me?
Right.
What is me? Yes. And it's really interesting to watch children go through this process.
It gets really embedded.
It really gets embedded, and we reinforce it. Whereas the true self or the higher self is always thinking we.
Yes.
And if you really turn me upside down, it's we.
It is, huh?
And it's asking those beautiful, brilliant questions of yourself. How am I using this situation, reacting in this situation to make it about me when it's really about the greater, bigger picture?
Well, and Kabbalah has this beautiful concept about the ego that says that the ego has the desire to receive for the self alone, which is me.
Yes.
But when you're operating from your higher self, you want to receive, but you want to receive so that you have more to share with the rest of the world or with people around you.
And so when your purpose is driven by separation is the false self. It separates you out. Oh, I'm special in this way. Whereas, this is blame, hostility, and resentment. Oftentimes pride shows up as the false self. Whenever we're complaining, we're in the false self and we're in the ego. Whereas the true self has understanding. It understands, has compassion, friendliness, and forgiveness. And
let me give a commercial break right quick. We're going to go back to that list. You are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant. And today we're talking about all of the illusions of the ego that keep you separate from source.
And we'll be back with more on tools.
No, go ahead. And now you can finish the list.
Wonderful. The complaining and jealousy. And jealousy really comes in when you start comparing yourself to another.
Yes.
You're moving into the false self and you're moving into the ego. Whereas there's happiness, co-happiness.
Yes.
You feel happy that someone else is achieving or succeeding.
Yes.
That co-happiness.
You don't feel like it's taking anything away from you.
Correct. There's more than enough for everyone. And somehow someone else succeeding has just given more to you.
Absolutely. Because we're all one.
Because we're all one. That's such being very, very humble And
oh wow, what a concept!
Which I love Kim Michaels for. Which his humility, he's studied this, he's researched it, and he's given it away over and over. And yet he says, "Mine is not the only way to look and view this."
But the ego will say, "Mine is the way."
Yes, absolutely. And then there's anger and power and materialism. You know, one of the things that kids learn is, oh, if I get the good grades, then I'll be worthy again, or with God again.
Or it's about, you know, like with college students, 60-something% of college students are not in college to get an education.
Yes.
They're in college because they want to make more money.
Yes.
It's about materialism. And not that there's anything wrong with wanting to do better or to have more. We're here to experience more.
Yes.
But when you're sacrificing materialism for spirituality and connectedness, then that's when you get off balance.
We're looking at the effects of materialism on Earth,
especially in America.
In America, having more and more. And driving into the studio today, I was listening to the radio, and I heard, you know, Obama's process that we're going through right now, which is, you know, cutting automatic funding off for different things, and saying we really want to have economic growth without sacrificing what's really, really important. And that really is moving from the false self into the true self, meaning as a country, whichever political movement you're with, whichever we're moving into the we, which is really, really beautiful
and
to say.
There's actually an organization of kids across the country called the We Generation.
The We, yes.
And we're moving out of the me generation.
And it's so great to really, the false self will get mad and create wars.
Yes.
There's coldness.
Vindictiveness.
And whenever we fall into a story about the past or anxiety about the future, we're falling into the false self. And the true self, spiritualism, wisdom, saying...
And it's in the now.
And it's in the now, saying, when I get to that event, I'll know what to do.
Yeah.
I'll just breathe through it. When there is new orientation.
Yeah.
And there is a really tolerance. We emphasize how can we all win-win.
Right.
Versus self-importance.
Yeah. Versus win-lose.
Also self-denial.
Yes.
Whenever a problem comes up, to deny it altogether.
Yeah, really, that it doesn't. And we're going to be talking about that from the perspective of the ego, this gray mentality that denies that there is any real problem in the world.
And I think that's part of the reason for all of the obesity, all of the medication, all of the stuff is it's a way to deny what's actually happening. Whereas altruism, self-acceptance, social acceptance, and simplicity.
Yes.
There's this
the ego likes to complicate everything.
It truly does. And especially our lives, our cars, our homes, with lots and lots of stuff.
Yes.
Living simply connects into the unity of it all.
Okay.
Whereas materialism or having more really goes into the separation, into the false self.
Okay. So that list is on the Divine Love Talk website. And when we come back from commercial break, Kim, I would like for you to go into how the ego uses black and white thinking, which I call dichotomous thinking. You know, it's either right or wrong, you know, good or evil. And then how it keeps you separate from true spirituality, and how we move into gray thinking, which is another form of separation. You are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant, Dr. Sarah Larsen, who is with DrSarahLarsen.com, and Kim Michaels from TranscendenceToolbox.com. And today we are sharing tools from his website on the ego.
Thank you for being with us.
Welcome back to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant and Dr. Sarah Larsen at DrSarahLarsen.com and Kim Michaels at TranscendenceToolbox.com. Today we're sharing tools from Kim Michaels' website on the ego, and he is our expert on the ego and spirituality. Kim, one of the points that a lot of the audience is not aware of is that the title, that Christ is a title, and that there is something called the Christ consciousness, which Christ did try to teach us when he kept saying, the Father and I are one. So could you open up with the Christ consciousness, explaining that to the audience, because that's going to be a tool that's going to help us with our ego.
Yeah, well, if you want to take it in a Christian perspective, you can take the Gospel of John, which starts out with talking about the Word. And the Word was from the beginning with God, and the Word was God, and without the Word was not anything made that was made. And then later, of course, it talks about Jesus as well as a representative of the Word.
Okay.
And I believe that what we need to do, and what I believe that what Jesus himself was very clear on, was that he had attained the Christ consciousness,
yes,
but he was not the fullness of the Christ consciousness, because the Christ consciousness has a universal aspect that's beyond any individual human being on a planet like Earth.
Okay.
And so I think we need to keep this in mind, that there is a universal aspect of the Christ consciousness, and this is something that's beyond the earth, and that means that the ego cannot do what the ego always wants to do, control everything. Okay, the ego will never be able to control the Christ consciousness.
Okay.
But what it has attempted to do is to create a system, a religion, that says there was only one person in the history of the world who could have the Christ consciousness, and that was Jesus. And I believe that Jesus himself would denounce that idea very, very, very clearly, because there is a situation in the Bible where a man comes up to him and says, "Good master." And Jesus gets very stern and says, "There's none good but God."
All right.
And so I think Jesus was very realistic in realizing that he was just an open door for the Christ consciousness to express itself in the world, and that we all have that potential.
Yes. And you point out that the Word is also the only begotten Son of God, which is the Christ consciousness, and that the Christ consciousness represents paradise, which in the story of the Garden of Eden, that's what it's about, is our loss of paradise and our loss of the Christ consciousness, and that the fundamental...
Well, really our loss of oneness. Because
right.
The Christ consciousness is oneness.
Yes.
Because the Christ consciousness was actually created, talk about more about that on the website, but we have to understand that the universe is designed based on the fact that God gave us free will.
Yes.
And that means we can lose our way away from oneness. We can make choices that take us away from oneness. And so what the way God designed it is that the Christ consciousness is the unifying element, which means that no matter how far we go into separation, we always have a way back to oneness. And that is the function of the universal Christ consciousness.
Is to bring us back into oneness.
It's a doorway.
Yeah.
And I think Christ says beautifully that all that I've done, you can do all that I've done and more. And I think that is the we generation that's coming in, that's becoming evidence of that. As we interact with one another in more of a we way, in our true authentic self way, we're creating more and more of a shift, and more of an opening to where people wind up being in our company and having these transformational things happening because we've collectively grown our openness, our open door to allow Christ consciousness or the oneness consciousness or God consciousness.
Okay.
And
well, the mind of Antichrist, Kim, you stated is in opposition to the mind of Christ because it is based on the illusion that it is separated from God, and it's based on division and duality. Thus, free will gives you two options for expressing your creativity. So could you go into what happened with, well, actually, we only have 60 seconds now, but we're going to go into what happened when, with free will, when we moved into duality consciousness. After commercial break, you are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Sarah Larsen, Kim Michaels from Transcendence Toolbox, and today we're sharing information on the illusions that the ego has trapped us into that keeps us in a place of struggle and a place of misery, drama, craziness, and chaos. So more of Divine Love Talk when we come back from commercial break. You're listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant. We're back with more of Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant and my co-host, Dr. Sarah Larsen, and our co-host, Kim Michaels, who is our expert on the ego and spirituality. Kim is going to be talking to us about the difference between the Christ consciousness and the anti-Christ consciousness. And he's also going to go into dichotomous or black and white thinking and gray thinking. But we want to mention again that you should check out the Facebook page with the posting on the Healing What Hurts seminar that's coming up, where Dr. Sarah and I will be taking the few participants that we are gathering for this workshop through the blockages that their ego is creating that's causing problems in their finances, in their relationships, with their spirituality, and in all areas of their life. And Dr. Sarah has been referred to as the psychic doctor by some of her clients, a Yoda, and she is seen as a catalyst for change because after sessions with her, her clients feel free and they feel centered. And I know I certainly feel that way anytime I have one with you. So I want to encourage you guys to come out and experience Dr. Sarah in our Healing What Hurts seminars on March 16th from 10 until 5 at the beautiful Americana, all day.
All day, and it's so beautiful to work through it. You set your intention to work through it, and I love this love note that you received on Valentine's Day, and on your desk, a student left it for you. And what's beautiful is you'll have chances. People that work with us one-on-one really feel inspired to share themselves vulnerably. And this note is such a vulnerable, beautiful note. It starts, Parthenia, I'm here to let you know how grateful I am to have found you in this solar system, in this galaxy, on this planet, and this exact continent. How lucky I am, I wonder. Do you ever notice how often you save lives? My past has been very dark, but you helped me see the light crack through the ruins of my life, of my left behind higher self. I don't know how I can ever replace all the hours, sweat, tears, and blood that you have given my generation, me, and those I come across. Hope can really change things. Being able to make our dreams into reality is the most beautiful creation life and the cosmos allows us. But to have hope and faith, to empower those dreams, well, that's the stuff that your love is made of. Thank you for your love, attention, and wonderful dreaming. I'll never forget you. And it's signed with a little bit of art, Heaven Nunez. And there's a great quote that she wrote on here. It's not the color of our skin that matters when it's our heart that paints. That's original by Heaven Nunez, coming out of your critical thinking course.
And I feel so blessed. When I got on the elevator this morning, this guy said, so how are you doing? It's Monday. And I said, yeah, you know, most people drop dead from heart attacks Monday morning because they hate their jobs. I said, but I love mine. And he said, what do you do? And I said, I get to teach college students and help open their minds and change their lives, and I get to do this wonderful radio show. Yes. So I do feel very, very blessed to be able to be of service to people that are in need. So we want to invite you guys to join us in our very first Healing What Hurts seminar.
And we do this because we love you and we get the oneness of it all. And we've seen over the years how someone comes in without having the tools and given the tools gets centered, gets free, is living the life of their dreams, has better relationships than they ever imagined possible, heals the past, and are free to really live into the future.
And the best thing is it doesn't take 10 years.
Right.
You can shift literally within the hour.
By being with us now this weekend.
Absolutely. This March 16th. So Kim Michaels, now he is the expert on the ego. And Kim, I want to get back to the Antichrist mind and the tricks that the ego uses in terms of dichotomous thinking and gray thinking.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the Garden of Eden that you mentioned earlier. And a logical question to ask yourself is, why was that forbidden fruit in the garden? And why was the serpent allowed to be in the garden?
Yes.
And the short explanation is that it actually, the forbidden fruit represents the potential we have because of free will.
Yes.
As I said earlier, we can either go more closer to oneness or we can go away from oneness. And take note of what the serpent said to Eve, that if you eat this fruit, you will not die, you will become as a God, knowing good and evil. And what that means is that the forbidden fruit is the Antichrist consciousness.
Right.
When you go into it, you actually begin to believe that you are like a God because you can define what's good and evil, what's true and untrue, what's real and unreal.
All right.
But the problem is that that definition you come up with is born out of separation, so it has no reality to it. That's why Jesus said of the devil, there is no truth in him. And it is only through the Christ consciousness that we can see the underlying truth that all life is one. And so once we go into separation, we start creating this fantasy picture. And that's where, as you said, you get into dichotomous thinking or black and white thinking. And black and white thinking really says there is only one possible truth, therefore everything else is false.
Yes.
And that means that if you believe what I have defined, not what is the truth, but what I have defined as the truth, then you'll go to heaven. If not, you'll go to hell, and then maybe it's even okay that I torture you and kill you for your own good.
That's right. It's for your own good.
And that black and white thinking is really the cause of most of the conflicts. There's a whole movement out there now called the New Atheists, where they try to portray that it's religion that's the cause of all warfare. But it's actually black and white thinking.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that science itself, or at least materialistic science, has done a lot to actually make black and white thinking worse.
Okay.
Because
and give an example.
We tend to think that a scientific investigation and experiment reveals only one possible truth, like the law of gravity. There is really only one way to explain why apples fall to the ground. That's because there's a force that's pulling them down. But that isn't the case. And we have known this since the 1920s, when scientists discovered quantum physics or developed quantum physics. Now, if we go into this, I can try and go into it really quick.
Go ahead.
There is a famous experiment in quantum physics that's called the double slit experiment. And what it basically shows is that a subatomic so-called particle sometimes behaves as a particle that's localized in space, and at other times it behaves as a wave that's extending through space. Right. Now, based on black and white thinking, you will say this is impossible. It's got to be either a particle or a wave. It can't be both. But what the real understanding, the deeper understanding of this enigma is that it's the questions we are asking that are the problem. Because we are trying to force reality into the system we have created, where something must be either a particle or a wave. And this is black and white thinking, where we have shut ourselves off. It has to be either or. It cannot be both. But the reality is we need to find a way to ask better questions, so that we can understand what reality really is. Because it's neither a particle nor a wave. It's our whole concept that needs to be taken to a higher level. And that's what quantum physics proved in the 1920s, but nobody has paid really, well, a lot of people have paid attention, but not any hardcore scientists.
Right, because scientists have their scientific method, and if it doesn't fit their scientific method, which is based on the five senses, which is the ego, if you can't see it, feel it, hear it, taste it, touch it, it doesn't exist, and then it keeps us stuck in that place, and then we're not even allowed to ask questions, and many of the religions will discourage you from asking questions. But then let's fast forward, Kim, and move, like a lot of people do manage to move out of dichotomous black and white thinking where they believe that their religion is the only one. And then they move into what's often a new age group or a metaphysical group, and they move into gray thinking where they believe that everything is all good and everything is positive. And if I just think positive, that, that's going to take care of everything for me. And a lot of people, their egos trick them and they get stuck in gray thinking, and they think that they found the answer there in that form of spirituality.
Yes, and that is unfortunate because it causes a lot of very spiritual people. And in my view, the people who have moved out of black and white thinking, they are the ones who have the potential to take our culture and our civilization beyond black and white thinking and beyond all of this warfare. But you can't do that as long as you're stuck in gray thinking. So people really need to move out of this gray thinking and realize it isn't correct, as the black and white thinkers say, that there is only one truth. But it is not correct either, as the gray thinkers, to say that there is no reality, there is no truth, or there's no way we can know, because we can know through the Christ consciousness.
Right, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, the thing is that in the Christ consciousness, we don't actually elevate one of the old truths as the one and only. We, as I said, we discover a whole new way to look at life that isn't based on these dichotomies and the either-or thinking.
Okay.
And that's the beauty of the Christ consciousness.
Well, you are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant, Kim Michaels, our expert on spirituality and the ego with Transcendence Toolbox. We're sharing some amazing tools about the illusions of your ego. You're also listening to Dr. Sarah Larsen, our other co-host, with drsarahlarsen.com. Now, Kim, I would like to go a little further into gray thinking, but I see Dr. Sarah has something to add.
Oh, I would love to add, judgment, that the stories that we're all talking about is the bottom line is when we're judging something or someone or a situation, we're not loving them and we're not accepting them. And so the most important thing is to find, whenever you're judging something, to really bring in, like Kim Michaels is saying, to bring in questions.
Yes.
And when you get into a chronic pattern of thinking, when you're thinking of that old lover or something in the future, to really bring in a powerful second or 2 seconds of breaking that thought with something that you love to break those connections.
Well, and when you were talking about judgment, what I thought about, Kim, on your website is how the ego wants to feel superior to God, superior to everybody. And when you get into black and white thinking, there's that superiority. My religion is better than yours, or I have found the only way. And then when you move into gray thinking, you're still thinking that, the way is to, you think you're not judging anybody, and then you move into, well, anything goes because it's all relative, and they can't move into this area of understanding that even Jesus and Buddha, they actually spoke out and they tried to raise the consciousness of the people around them. So I'd like for you to address that, Kim.
Yeah, well, the worst thing about gray thinking is that it pacifies people.
Yes.
Because you have in the black and white thinking, people are often very, very aggressive, and they have to be, because they have said there's only one truth and it's mine.
Right.
This means that they are automatically threatened by anything else than their truth.
Yes.
And so they are constantly defending themselves. And of course, the best form of defense is an attack. So you go out and accusing other people of being wrong, or other people of being of the devil and this and that. And so many people, when they move out of that, they simply get so fed up with this aggressive energy where people are always projecting that you are wrong if you're not like me. And it goes viewpoints, it goes skin color, it goes race, religion, whatever. So many people who move out of black and white thinking, they see this, they see how completely they just don't want to deal with it anymore.
Yeah.
But the result is that then they withdraw themselves and they say, I don't want to say anything anymore. Yes. I don't want to take part of the public debate. And that's tragic, because when people move through gray thinking, they can come up, like you said, with a different perspective, which is what both Jesus and the Buddha and many other spiritual teachers have done. They don't, like Sarah was saying earlier, they don't speak from the ego and the separateness of being threatened and judging. They speak a different voice, a voice of love. Mm-hmm. And it will take millions of people speaking from that centeredness to change our culture and our mindset.
Well, that's very powerful, because with great thinking, they believe that being loving means you should be gentle and never challenge people's illusions. And yet, if you never challenge people's illusions, they will stay asleep. And if you believe that everything goes, because you're in this relative, everything is relative and there is no truth, there's no real truth out there, then you end up on another extreme. And one of the points that you bring out is the importance of balance, because the egoic mind keeps us at these different extremes. Dr. Sarah, you were going to say something quickly.
I want to point out that you have a great article in a whole calendar this month on balance and equilibrium, as as you bring, I wrote, as you bring that up. And I think balance comes in so beautifully when you are with someone and you're finding yourself in conflict, you and your husband, finding that connectedness, that centered compassion, and where are you excluding the other person's values?
Okay. Well, you are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant, Dr. Sarah Larsen, our co-host, and Kim Michaels. And when we come back from commercial break, we will take our first callers. We're opening it up to questions for Kim Michaels on the topic of the ego. And we will be continuing this discussion, because we can only do so much in 35 minutes. So join us after commercial break with questions about the ego. You're listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant. Okay, we're back with more of Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant, Kim Michaels, our expert on the ego from Transcendence Toolbox, and Dr. Sarah Larsen. We have a couple of callers who have questions, probably for Kim Michaels, on the ego. Our first caller is from North Hollywood. We've got Princess. So, Princess, what's your question?
Okay, this question is for Kim Michaels, and I want to know that the lack of communicating with people clearly is one of the blockages the ego is creating in my life, especially in my relationships. So how can I go about that?
Kim.
Well, I would say that the first thing you could look at, and I'm not saying this is the only thing, but the first thing you could look at is, why do I feel threatened? What is it in me that feels threatened when I communicate with other people? What am I afraid of is going to happen? What is it that always upsets me? And then you keep looking at those feelings. You keep asking yourself, what are the thoughts I have when I encounter this situation where I feel threatened? And then you have to keep looking at that, go into deeper layers and find these sometimes it can be very, very subtle. You might be afraid that if other people say something you disagree with, you have to feel bad about yourself. You may be able to trace that to a situation in your childhood. But what I'm saying is we each have these little trigger mechanisms in us. And usually when there's communication problems, it's because the other people are pushing our buttons. Yes. And so we need to make these buttons conscious so we can see what they are.
And Princess, I would add in terms of us needing approval, sometimes we're afraid that if we speak our truth, other people won't like us or love us or will lose their approval. Dr. Sarah, do you have anything?
Oh, and I want to add that we've been trained not to use our voice. And
that's true, especially
women finding our resonance and what's really, really true is a process. And so really working on sharing, and it's a step-by-step process. And doing it once will let you do it again and again.
And we have another call from Tiffany where's Tiffany? Okay. Tiffany, are you on the line?
I am here.
Okay.
Hi, thank you guys very much. I have a question. I've most certainly been labeled a gray person for the majority of my life, and I definitely, as I examine myself, I can say that it's because I've always been very sensitive, and I find that people, I've been surrounded by a lot of people who had black and white thinking my entire life.
So what's your question?
Well, the question is, how do I come out of my gray? How do I come out of my grayness and but at the same time not step into black and white thinking? Because I do have a trouble communicating, especially when I'm dealing with a black and white person.
Okay.
And it's either not this or it's that. You know what I'm saying?
Kim, can you take that one?
Well, it's a very typical reaction for people who have started to come out of black and white thinking, because we really don't want to deal with these people who are so accusatory and who get so upset, because their only way of dealing with a conflict is that they have to put us down.
Yes.
And we're tired of that.
And make you wrong.
But the only way that I have found in my life to deal with that is to say, well, why do I feel that way? Why do I feel they're putting me down? What is my wound that I can overcome? Because if you can overcome your wound, you will be able to speak out without going into black and white thinking.
All right. So thank you, Tiffany and Princess, for calling in. We will be taking calls at the end of the hour from now on. And next week, we will have more of the challenges that we face with the ego and how to challenge ideas with divine kindness. And we want to encourage you to go to Divine Love Talk on Facebook, check out the flyer for the Healing What Hurts seminars. And we want to thank all of you for joining us today and expanding your consciousness and awareness about the obstacles that are standing in the way of your peace of mind and your prosperity and health and happiness, and that main stumbling block would be your ego. You have been listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN. Check us out on Facebook. Be sure to like us. Kim Michaels at Transcendence Toolbox and Dr. Sarah Larsen at drsarahlarsen.com. Thank you.